Welcome once again to the Global Perspective event. My name is Miriam Chitza-Gambini. I am the project manager of the Accelerating Inclusive Power Shift project at the center. I will describe myself. I am a Black woman with dark long hair, wearing an off-white and green blouse. So it is my pleasure to welcome our panel, Beyond the North-South Divide, Future Models of Cooperation, where we will explore diverse partnerships and showcase the latest thinking around Southern cooperation modalities in the framework of the Shift to Power movement. I now have the pleasure to introduce you to our chair for today's session, Garrett Sun, who is Country Director for Plan International Dominican Republic. Over to you, Garrett.
Hi, hello everybody. A pleasure to be here and thank you all for joining this session. My name is Gerrit San. I will be the moderator for today's Global Perspective section number 4, Beyond the North-South Divide, Future Models of Cooperation on the Power Shift. So welcome once again. I'll briefly describe myself. I am a white male person, originally from Europe, so I have a bit of a European background, but I have been what we call Colombianized, as I've been living many years already in Colombia, so I've got a bit of a mixture of both, let's say. So my current role is being the country director at Plan International in Dominican Republic. I've been working almost for 20 years now in the third sector, let's say, so specifically in Latin America, with several NGOs, big international NGOs, the most of them, but also with some local ones. And yeah, that's about it, I think. I would like just to go to the introductions and present to you our panel members of today, which will be leading, in essence, the discussion that we will have. I'm very pleased to welcome Cecilia Milesi. Cecilia Milesi is the founder and CEO of Global Change Center, a Southern-led platform facilitating innovative South-South learning and multipolar dialogues for knowledge co-creation. In partnership with the Praxis Institute of Participatory Practices, Global Change Center is currently facilitating a Southern-led global study on equality-oriented evaluation commissioned by the Ford Foundation. Between 2018 and 2019, Cecilia was a senior advisor on South-South Cooperation for Peace and Development at the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. And in that role, she facilitated a process with the aim to design and implement a South-South cooperation strategy on peace and development in dialogue with all UN member states, and in preparation for the historic second UN high-level conference on South-South cooperation. The second panel member that we welcome today is Philip Goodwin. Dr. Philip Goodwin joined VSO as a chief executive in March 2015. VSO's work creates lasting change by unlocking the power of people, putting them at the center of their own development. And since 2015, Philip has overseen the development of VSO's volunteering for development method, which seeks to address the root causes of marginalization and vulnerability by focusing on social inclusion, and gender, social accountability and resilience. And then the last panel member is Marianne Meyer-Nunes. Marianne is currently a Shift to Power Fellow, which is an initiative by the Global Fund for Community Foundations. During her time as executive director of ICON, a community foundation established in the south of Brazil, she has designed and tested different methodologies and initiatives for movement building, and community strengthening in complex environments, enabling change by connecting, convening, and building bridges with and between people and local organizations. Marianne is engaged in strengthening networks of civil society organizations as a consultant, and is also part of the advisory board of ICON. So that's a bit it. The idea maybe also just to explain what we'll do is we will have a round of different panel members. They will each go through a presentation of them, of the topic that they would like to highlight a bit. Then in a second moment, we will have some questions that we will ask to different panel members. And in the third moment, we will open also the microphone for the audience to be able to ask any questions via chat or directly via the microphone. Good. So if we are ready to start, I would like to pass the microphone on to Cecilia so that she can start with her presentation.
Thank you so much, Gerrit and Miriam. It's very nice to be with all of you. I can see some names that sounds very familiar. So I hope we have a good hour and a half ahead sharing knowledge and inspiration. Ryan, can you share my presentation, please? I suppose I need to introduce myself a little bit. Well, I'm a woman, a Latino woman from Argentina. So it's a kind of brown, but not super brown, and kind of white, mix, long hair, using glasses, and very happy to be here with you all. For this presentation, I'm very grateful if you help me to keep the time, because as a Latino woman, I love talking quite a lot, so I will try to be brief, but I thought that's very important to start with a little bit of history of South-South cooperation. What we are seeing as a Global Change Center, as a platform, and working with many people committed to power shift, is that sometimes our history is invisibilized. It seems that attempts to power shift started only recently, perhaps a few years ago. Some of people in the global north, for example, said that the power shift started with all the Oxfam Save the Children scandals, some attempts by northern organizations to start talking about localization, and attempt to do decentralization processes. But I think it's very important that we regain the power and the force of the long history of struggle from the global South peoples and countries in our attempt to really determine our futures, to control our power, resources, and our destiny as nations and as organizations. So first of all, I just wanted to give you a little bit of this historical background, sharing how the whole story of South-South cooperation started globally, then sharing a little bit more of details of what are these South-South cooperation principles that are very strong when you enter into multilateral conversations, in particular at the United Nations level, but they are very little known by civil society organizations, only now being really recognized as something important. So I'm going to share a little bit more of what are these principles and how they are so different to the practices and principles that are guiding action of what is called North-South cooperation. So I'm going to present a small table about that and then give you concrete examples of how we are trying to promote South-South cooperation. At this moment now, I'm promoting it from the civil society position within the ecosystem, but of course, as a social leader, I've been supporting Southern leadership in many other positions, not only in the UN, but also in international NGOs and grassroots organizations, but always with the same direction and the same vision, which I hope it's inspiring all of us to move forward into a situation of real change in the international cooperation business. And then I hope to share a few ideas, radical ideas, to then take any questions. So Ryan, if you can move to the first slide. What I wanted to tell you is a little bit of the history. Some of you may know that the South-South cooperation attempt, movement started in 1955 with the first conference, which is called the Bandung Conference, organized by some of the countries that were recently became independent from the oppressive power of imperial countries in mainly European countries that were for decades and centuries oppressing our cultures and our people. These countries came together in the Bandung Conference and set up what we call the South-South cooperation principles that then led to the formation of the non-alignment movement. Basically, countries from the global South that don't want to say, I'm with this part of the geopolitical bloc, either the US and Europe or Russia and China, more communist part countries. So they really wanted to regain voice, regain power, determine their own path to development, their own path to policy making, to creating prosperous societies after all these decades of massive oppression because of colonialism. So that's how the South-South cooperation principles were set up. Then through the UN processes of multilateral dialogue, there were a couple of conferences organized, one in 1978 in Buenos Aires, and another one very recently where I was highly involved in 2019, which are called the UN high-level conferences of South-South cooperation, where again, all the Global South countries, and of course, in dialogue with the Global North countries associated in the OECD DAC forum, develop policies and outcome documents in regards to how we can achieve a path for inclusive development and peace and development. So I just wanted to mention that it's important to get to know this history. We've been fighting for our liberation, for the opportunity to have a voice, to manage our own path to development for ages, decades, and it's truly important that the INGOs, that donors, that funders do not pretend that this is a new story because of some of the scandals in the international organizations or because of the liberation movement that, of course, we support, for example, like the Black Lives Matter movement or feminist movements in the US, Europe, or other countries. People from the South, we've been fighting for this for decades. We've been being killed and persecuted for decades, and we have gained a lot of experience, and we have a lot of communality. The next slide, Ryan, please. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background of what are these South-South that were set by the Bandung conference and then are very important in the UN processes, and I believe need to be regained by the civil society organization of all sorts. It's not just a modality, but it's a principal approach to working together in solidarity. So the first most important principle is the respect of national sovereignty and the value of self-determination. The Global South countries, the Global South people, communities, social movements have the power and should be leading the process for policy change and for inclusive development. On the contrary, what many of us believe, but also what you can see if you deconstruct any of the policy decisions, policy documents of the OECD or many of other multilateral organizations, for example, that are led by northern countries, including the World Bank or some other development banks, we can see that the North-South modality of cooperation is based on imposition of conditionality. So I give you money only if you do this or that. It's always an exogenous, top-down, external approach to trying to promote change, social change, in which a lot of different standards and regulations are set, not by the people of the Global South, but by these northern organizations that enter into our ecosystem with concrete criteria and conditionalities, as I was saying, to then develop policies. So the South-South cooperation principles, one of the most important things is that we want to develop our own path for development, and we don't want to just follow constantly these manuals or guidelines on to how to do things, because again, we appreciate that it's necessary to be locally led and driven by our own culture, knowledge, and power. Another second principle of South-South cooperation is that demand-driven. This is essential for South-South cooperation. The request for funding, the request for support for any particular donor comes from the civil society or the national government that is requesting for X or Y set donation, grant, or loan in order to develop a particular project. It's not predefined, as in the North-South modality, it's not based on predefined criteria and priorities, but it's, as I'm saying, demand-driven. This is extremely important if you go to the outcome documents of the BAPA plus 40, the last South-South UN cooperation conference. This demand-driven modality was reaffirmed by all the member states, and in particular, of course, by the G77 plus China as a key feature of South-South cooperation. So everything we do, if we work with a South-South angle, comes from the bottom up. The third principle in South-South cooperation is that we embrace horizontal learning and mutual accountability. This idea of horizontal learning and South-to-South knowledge transfer is coming from the Bandung conference itself, but then it was reinforced by all the UN conferences. And now it seems that it's a kind of a very fashionable term, but as I was saying, it's been there for decades, and it's being advocated by all the people like are really supporting South-South cooperation. On the contrary, what we are seeing and why we are here promoting PowerShip is because we see in the way that other Northern organizations are working is basically imposing methodologies, is very concerned about upward accountability, only about capacity building, always working with this idea that there is no capacities in the South, there is no really knowledge, so we need to transfer the way that people should be doing things, and we are asked as Global South countries and organizations to simulate and to copy basically what is dictated by Northern organizations. All of this, of course, with a lot of all of this imposition comes with the attachment of white consultants, white volunteers. You know, I the founder of a volunteering organization, and we were unable to get funding for our volunteering programs if we were not hosting a Northern volunteer and opening our country's door and our organization's door, because the funding come attached with a volunteer, or the funding come attached with an Italian consultant or a Spanish consultant that comes and monitors everyday life of our organizations in Argentina or anywhere in the world. And finally, the focus is on self-reliance and finding our own path to autonomy, rather than a modality in which we increase dependency on Northern resources and decisions are centralized always at the top, mainly Northern donors. So I thought that it's very important just to present in a very simple graphic way this dichotomy between South-South and North-South approaches to work, and just put it in the framework that this is an historic long battle that luckily now is also reaching to a new level of visibility in the civil society and international civil society sector, but it's been a part of our work for years and our struggle for years. So Ryan, if you move to the next one, please. So as a global South-South platform, what we are trying to do is basically apply South-South principles in all we do. For example, as Gary was saying in the introduction, we are at the moment doing a South-South global study commissioned by Ford Foundation, in which we are involving researchers, organizations, think tanks, universities from Latin America, Asia, and Africa without interference of any particular university or academia from the global north. And we hope to gather knowledge to influence donors from the south. The second one is that, as I was saying, we're trying not to do capacity building, but really create a space for South-South learning, connecting activists from the different countries and regions that really were at the forefront of the struggle for democracy, justice, memory, etc. in our countries. So we do try not to work with technocrats or people that are external to our context, but really bring together those that are really the protagonists of social change and connect them in these facilitated spaces. So these are just very briefly these two examples, and I will be happy to give you more examples when we go into the questions and answers. But in short, what I believe we need to do is basically ensure that we apply the South-South principles that I was mentioning in everything we do. And this is a truly opportunity for power shift. And I hope that this conversation really enters into the donor space and international cooperation space as it seems is entering at the moment. So thank you so much. And I'm sorry for the time.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. And just to retake a bit your historic pathway that you draw for us to show how the South-South cooperation has started initially already many years ago. We'll link it up with the next session that Philip will provide us very quickly. Some interesting points of view of the role of INGOs specifically. And in many of the examples that Cecilia mentioned, where a Southern organization would like to receive a type of funding, etc., it can be conditioned often. It is also something that INGOs, of course, experience, and it might be very interesting to have a more in-depth look at what does it mean, this role of INGOs, and how can they play a role in balancing these principles out for South-South cooperation. So Philip, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. So hello, everyone. For the benefit of those who are visually impaired, I'm Philip. I'm a white man in his 50s, sitting against a background of rural Kenya, although I'm sitting in the UK. I'm wearing glasses. I have no hair, but I do have a light beard, which I'm told makes me either look older or stylish, or maybe both, who knows. So I've been asked to say a few words about the role of INGOs in future models of cooperation. And I think I'm going to echo quite a lot of what Cecilia has just said, actually. I think in INGO development cooperation, we're still grappling with this question of what is the role of global organizations as opposed to national ones. And the related assumption that a global organization must be a northern one. And my view in short is that for global organizations, international NGOs, there are important roles they can play in unlocking resources, on convening, on deploying knowledge, around collective action and influence on key issues, around accompaniment and capacity building in the national and local space, around quality assurance and delivery. But importantly, that doesn't require them to be northern organizations. Indeed, quite the opposite. And it's very clear to me from the VSO experience that the leadership, the knowledge, the strategy, the influence, the delivery is increasingly south-south, with the North quite rightly taking a back seat and indeed having an ever-diminishing role. Actually, I got in trouble about 5 years ago when I gave an interview to a magazine in the UK. And I said then that essentially all things being equal at VSO, our staffing in the global North and Northern staff employed by VSO would be decreasing relative to the size of the organization. And that seemed self-evident to me if we were committed to the majority world taking ownership of their own change. But as I say, it was seen as controversial at the time. And if I can be honest, it would probably be seen as controversial now if other CEOs in INGOs in the global North said it today. But for me, the challenge now is how do Northern INGOs transition to becoming truly global in their ambition, but Southern in their identity? And that relates to questions about how we're organized, our ways of working, our development methods, our activities, our leadership, our systems, and our accountability. So let me, as quickly as I'm able to, say a few words about VSO and how we've approached this in all its imperfections and with all its incompleteness, and very aware that I'm saying this as a white European who's based in the UK. So let me start by saying a few things about organizational structures and ways of working if identities shift. So at VSO, we've shifted away from not just a centralized global headquarters in the global North, but away from a centralized geographical headquarters. So in the UK, for example, from January next year, we will only have a virtual presence in the UK. And importantly for us, power is distributed and dispersed mostly into the global South based on a sort of functional leadership model rather than geographical leadership. So it's not based around country structures, but about global roles. So to be clear, VSO isn't franchising its work into national identity, but trying to maintain a sense of its globalness, but led from the global South. I think the other thing I just want to touch on is around the modalities of development assistance. And Cecilia spoke about this, and really I'm going to agree with what she said and repeat some of it. So for over a decade at VSO, we've been working on shifting the idea of agency. So Critically, we've moved away from this concept of beneficiaries to this concept of primary actors, which sees the people our organization works with as active agents of change rather than passive recipients of aid. And we've moved from a model which sees capacity as external to the system, primarily from the global north, to one in which national capability exists and needs to be recognized and advanced. So it's a shift to what I would call an asset-based national and community development rather than deficit-based, which requires external assistance, and historically has meant that external assistance comes from the global north. My sense is one of the reasons this view continues to hold is because of the focus of external assistance in the humanitarian space, rather than building national capacity, for which, if I can be blunt, there's not so very much interest in the global north. For well over, 10 years, maybe almost 15 now, the VSO Volunteering for Development method has primarily been delivered through South-South cooperation. So 86% of international volunteers at VSO are from the global South. But in the last 4 years, we've now gone much further and focused primarily on national volunteers and increasingly community volunteers as the key development actors. So last year of 3,500 volunteers that VSO worked with, only 800 were international volunteers, and 700 of those were from the global South. So the overwhelming majority of volunteering capacity and expertise was national volunteers, and all of those, of course, from the global South. I think this point around external assistance challenges a lot of what I would call, and Cecilia called it, technocratic delivery. So, which whether it is South-South or North-South is still hierarchical, particularly around how knowledge is deployed from experts to non-experts, and still hierarchical in the definition of solutions and success. So despite the passing of the decades, a lot of development cooperation, and Cecilia said this as well, is still supply-driven and technocratic in the way it's organized. And that's both supply-driven in terms of policy, but also supply-driven in terms of articulation of needs and solutions. So for VSO, we see our strength in working with the demand side of the equation, citizen-led, and at its heart, our work is informed by the idea of active citizenship, where citizens around the world exercise agency to make demands on duty bearers, as well as exercising their own individual and collective agency to deliver change. And that is really the informing principle of our work. And that recognizes that every individual has assets and abilities. People discover those assets and abilities in their relationship to their community through association. And people create institutions by organizing around those collective assets to deliver change and demand rights. And that at its heart is VSO's method as an INGO. And our view is it is intrinsically not just South-South, which it should be, but also rooted in place, rooted in national identity and and in community identity. So our role is not to be a national entity or a franchise, but to be a global organization supporting the development of a global movement of active citizens. But there are still, in my view, fundamental privileges and discriminations that are a barrier to change. So we still excessively reward external inputs in development assistance. So the international cooperation model is still built on expatriate working in both management and technical assistance, which reinforces power imbalances, which reinforces privilege and paternalism. So one of the things, again, at VSO, which has radically changed things, is just moving to national paying conditions for all staff employed. It immediately removes incentives for many expatriates, particularly from the global north, and it changes the whole power dynamic of organizations. And I ask myself the question, why should expatriates be rewarded excessively for their labor? It just reinforces discrimination. And the final thing I want to say is about the need to reframe accountability. And again, I'm echoing what Cecilia said, but we need to move away from the donor as having primacy in accountability conversations and away from the INGO as having primacy in accountability conversations to ensuring the primary actor has primacy or at least greater power. And for VSO, we've adopted a monitoring, evaluation, and learning process, which is people-centric in its method and allows for a fusion between technical rigor and primary actors' authentic participation and ownership in co-creating, learning, influencing, and promoting forward accountability in VSO. So let me stop there. There's a lot of stuff, but I do want to echo, well, or to reinforce actually that much of what I've said is echoes what Cecilia said around changing power in the way we frame our work as INGOs. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. I just wanted to highlight some of the things you said at the beginning, which were very interesting about the power that needs to shift, where the North in general, or the global North, needs to take a backseat in the car, right? And we would like to see the Southern actors and Southern communities taking the driver's seat. And that's just the session that we'll see with Mariana now is a bit about an initiative called Shift the Power, the Shift the Power movement, which is a movement that is just looking for that, right? How do we get those actors from the global South to take the seat of the driver and not the back seat? And then what does it mean and how they are doing it? So Mariana, now over to you.
Thank you so much, Garrett. Well, I will start by describing myself. I'm Mariani, and I'm a Latina woman connecting from Florianópolis. It's a place located in the south of Brazil. I'm white and my hair is blonde and a bit long, and I'm wearing a green shirt. I would also ask Ryan if you could share the slides, please. Okay, great. So first of all, I would like to say that it's a pleasure to be here sharing the panel with Cecilia and Philip. And also thank you, Garrett, for moderating, and Miriam for the invitation. So I'm from the Global South, and I have spent a considerable time of my career leading a community foundation established in the south of Brazil. I'm also a Shift the Power Fellow. It's an initiative by the Global Fund for Community Foundations. And the Global Fund is a global organization that has been working with the global philanthropy field since 2006. And the goal of the fellowship program is to deepen and expand the Shift the Power movement. And that's why I'm here speaking with you all today, bringing my local development and community philanthropy perspective experience to contribute to this conversation about future models of cooperation. So I will start by talking a little bit about the movement. So what's this Shift the Power movement? Ryan, can you please change the slides? So in 2016, the Global Fund organized the Global Summit on Community Philanthropy in Johannesburg, where the Shift the Power hashtag was first used. And the hashtag was initially created to promote the event, and because it was understood that in order to talk about changing the development system, and before talking about solutions, we had to talk about power. So you can see that I was there with other community philanthropy organizations and community foundations. And for those who don't have familiarity with the concept of community foundations, I'm sharing some characteristics as well. So Ryan, can you please change again? So usually when we're talking about a community foundation, we're also talking about a focus in one territory. Usually it could be like a city or a region. And it's an organization that has fundraising and grant-making practices, usually work a lot with trust building locally, and that has a governance that's really representative of their communities. So usually you have like people coming from different backgrounds, and also people that are really part of that community. So you can change again. It's a very dynamic presentation. Thank you. So the Shift the Power movement, we believe that, and from what we have seen, on one hand, has motivated international funders, aid agencies, multilaterals, and international civil society organizations to transform the ways in which they work in a very positive way. And on the other hand, the movement has sought to increase the visibility and collective voice of organizations from the Global South that are advocating for new ways of deciding and doing. And that's also the goal of the fellowship. And I'm glad I'm here speaking to you all. We as a movement, we believe that real change cannot be the preserve of a single organization or a single approach, and that change is more likely to happen when diverse actors come together in addressing complex systems. And as a practitioner working at a community foundation for many years, I have been exposed and responded with the community to very complex environments, including emergency situations. So I really wanted to share with you some lessons learned that connect with my experience, but also with the research that was conducted by the Global Giving and the Global Fund with other community philanthropy organizations as well. So it's like our collective voice bringing to you. And you can change the slide, right, please. So usually what we hear and what we found by working locally and also working in partnership with international partners is that the tools or programs that funders and external partners are using usually do not reflect the community's perspectives or preferences. And usually the programs that are developed outside of communities can miss the nuances of community-led processes and outcomes. I wish we had more time to discuss, but I bring like a few examples and lessons that I think are very important to this conversation. So the first one, and Ryan, you can please change the slide. So the first one is that the research process matters. And when we're talking about the research process, it's also bringing to the attention that usually community actors, and here we're talking about community foundations, that have updated knowledge of their territory. So they map indicators and they track those local indicators about a city or a region. And so it's really interesting to partner with local practitioners, seeing them both as experts and also interlocutors that could produce different kinds of conversations and outcomes. Ryan, you can pass again. Thank you. And here are a few examples. At ICOM, it's a community foundation that's established in south of Brazil. And I'm still part of the board of the organization. I used to be the executive director. And there, what we do is that we conduct community mappings in a participatory way, putting public issues in the city's agenda. And we have also shared with the international global community different methods. And here is a picture of us in a conference in Canada. And you can change again, Ryan, please. Another lesson learned is that relationships are the foundation of community-led work. And that's true because through strong and well-maintained relationships, the communities, they govern themselves. That's really aligned with what Cecilia mentioned as well about autonomy. So we identify the work that's important for us, and we commit to long-term results, holding each other accountable. And here is interesting to also bring an example. During the COVID context in 2020, we are facing like a lot of food insecurity, vulnerability in the community. And we quickly launched a community bank issuing digital coins to support vulnerable families. And we did a partnership with a UN agency so that we could together benefit the most vulnerable families in a very empowering way. So the families would receive like a digital coin and they could spend that fund in whatever they needed, the items they really needed. And that was really transformative because that UN agency before they would buy food items and distribute to the community. So it kind of changed the way that we operated in a very empowering way. So that's one example. And Ryan, you can move almost there. Finally, funders and external partners can support and promote community-led processes. That's what I really believe. And this is possible when they communicate openly and we work in partnership and appreciation for and curiosity about local conditions and context. And also like flexible funding and non-financial resources are two concrete and important offerings that promote community-led approaches. And finally, Ryan, you can please go ahead. I will end with an inspiring case about an experimental project and on collaboration and partnership that actually brought together 5 civil society and international development actors. And Philip, I think that also brings some ideas to your questions about the role of NGOs. And I put all these resources in the chat here, so you can have access to it, and we can continue this conversation. And I hope those lessons learned and the conversation would be somehow helpful to your own organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. A very interesting example of how this outside cooperation becomes tangible. And if it's okay for you, I'd like to proceed with some of the questions that we had prepared already. I'll start with you. The question that we had prepared is, when discussing a power shift, a key call to action is for actors to repurpose the power they hold, right? Local actors like community foundations have power in their own context relative to the communities they serve. In your opinion, what approaches and methodologies can Southern civil society actors adopt to truly foster power-balanced partnerships with local communities and to avoid replicating unequal power dynamics like the ones that we have mentioned today, for example, in different presentations?
Thank you, Garrett. That's an excellent question, and we talk a lot about this among other community philanthropy organizations. And I think for answering this question, I'll be quoting some of the Shift the Power manifesto and also bring an example that also illustrates the power shift in the community. So first, I wanted to share that the community foundation is part of that local community. So we don't see ourselves like working for that community, but with. So it's kind of a different approach. And when we talk about community philanthropy, we are already talking about reorganizing power. But it's true that we still have to challenge our own power, the power we hold, the power dynamics when working with others locally, because we work with populations that are more vulnerable. So for example, one example that we have is that at the Community Foundation here in the south of Brazil, we have worked with the movement of homeless people, so with the homeless people population. And we decided to get together and conduct a participatory mapping. So the homeless people themselves, they could ask the questions they wanted to know about that population. We did not have enough indicators to build solid public policies in the city. So we worked together and also with the Global Fund for Community Foundations in conducting this mapping. And we're able to launch the research in partnership with the movement. And also we had like 12 people that were in homeless situation conducting the research with us. So it's kind of a different approach. And when we're doing the presentation to public policy makers, the people themselves, like the homeless people, they presented, the data that they found, not us. So that's just one small example of how we can look at this power dynamics locally. And so we're constantly finding creative ways to unlock the power of communities. That's kind of the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. I'll now go for a question with Philip. And it's more about the presentation that he did already, where he talked about INGOs and the role they have, and then also international civil society organization.
Okay, then I'm happy to continue with the question that we had in mind for you, Philip. I think, yeah, in your intervention, you were talking about the future role of ICSOs and NGOs, and now it's less clear in the global society configuration, and how VSO has a long history of fostering South-South cooperation through your volunteering projects. So could you tell us a bit more, how can fellow ICSOs and NGOs learn from VSO's approach to knowledge and technical exchange among Global South chapters? And also perhaps elaborates more on how ICSOs can support a real shift in power and facilitate it through, for example, giving more agency for what concerns decision-making, funding, leadership, or in general, more power to local and national actors.
So as a big question, I suppose one of the things that strikes me is that the big thing INGOs can do is reflect on their leadership, I think. And I think that the role of leadership in and vision in reimagining what your organization might do and how it might do it is critical. So in many ways, look, I'm a relic, and increasingly I find myself a bit embarrassed. You know, I come here to talk about these things, but I'm a white European. But one of the things I think of VSO is we've been, I want to say ruthless, but we have been very, very focused on that shift. So when I gave that interview around the fact that our organization in the global north would shrink, understandably, people were shocked, because they thought, people in the global north thought, well, hang on, where's my job? And one of the difficult things you're saying is, actually, this isn't your job anymore. This is, you know, somebody else's job. Now, we weren't looking to sack people or whatever, but we were looking to transition over time. So, but you had to be really focused on that. So every time a role was coming up and someone left or whatever, you were then looking, how is that delivered differently if you take it from a global South perspective? And so every decision we've been making has been to think how you shift leadership, you know, strategy, working practice. So for us, again, we don't have, as a global organization, our teams are not based in a single geography. So if you look at our, for example, our knowledge, evidence and learning team, it's led by an Indian colleague from Delhi, but the members of that team are spread around the world in the global South. And that creates a different dynamic, because you don't have a group who are privileged by being in the same place. It has its challenges about working in virtual space, but it changes the dynamic. So you don't have a team based in Amsterdam who are mostly there, all talking to each other, but somebody is outside it. You have the token Southern member of staff who sometimes gets invited in, but often is not in the same time zone. You suddenly are forced to think in a completely different way. But I think that it requires leadership, and it requires a constant sort of checking about where you are. So this point I made about national terms and conditions, that was hugely unpopular. As you can imagine, you say there's going to be no expatriate allowances. And everyone believes in shifting the power, except when you say, well, actually, we're not offering you additional allowances for being an expatriate working in a place. And you can imagine, again, so we have virtually no, if I can be blunt, no white people from the global north in our operations now for the bulk of our work, because simply there's no extra award. So unless you go onto a national contract, which many people don't want to do, people go, well, I don't want to be part of that, because I think I should maintain my privilege within the system. So being ruthless about thinking about how we privilege ourselves as northern INGOs, and how as workers from the north working in northern INGOs, how do we privilege ourselves? You don't actually shift a whole range of ways of working. So I'm not sure that's a complete answer, but I think it does go back to leadership, because none of this stuff, there's lots of easy ways of doing it, or easier ways of doing this. But I think the big question in my mind as well is, what is the role of a global organization versus a national one? So one of the questions I keep asking is, I don't think it's right that INGOs, I don't think it's the best way forward for INGOs to franchise themselves into trying to create a nationalness around the franchise. So you'll be organization X, but you're nationally localized. I think there's something different about a global organization around global collective action that is different from supporting national civil society space. Now, I'm conscious that's a bit controversial, and VSO is somewhere between the two of those things. But in my view, we want to create, or we want to see globally, civil society wants to see a strong civil society, which is rooted in communities and countries. And so working out what the role of a global organization is in supporting global civil society and it is something different. And I think we're still struggling with it, to be honest. Certainly in the global, look, let's put it this way, in the global north, we're struggling with it.
Thank you, Philip, for all the honest account that you gave us. I think we all appreciate your transparency in how you think that ICSOs can do better in this regard, and connects well. We want to ask Cecilia, but I've seen that Garrett is back, so I don't want to take away your powers of moderation. So over to you, Garrett.
Sorry, the lights went out here in the Dominican Republic, so I was just away for a few minutes. Thank you very much, Philip. I could hear the last part of your answer, and just maybe to add on the answer of Philip, something very similar is happening, for example, in Plan International, where we're struggling with this question about what does it mean to be a global organization and how do we translate that into actions. And some of the easy answers we found for now is, for example, really opening global functions to the globe, right? Because traditionally any global role was always opened within, in our context for Plan, within Europe, in essence. What we said now, or what we've been doing for the last few years is, no, a role can be open in any country where Plan has an office. And we're seeing that a lot of new staff members come on board in global roles, but people from the global south, for example, they bring an entire new dynamic and perspective to the global conversations as such as an organization. Well, it's just one element, but maybe to build on what Philip was telling there. Good, I have a question for Cecilia then. And it's linked about a bit with her experience and extensive experience with institutional civil society cooperation. Where do you see the role of donors in this ecosystem around South-South cooperation, Cecilia? How can donors who would like to help with this power shift really support and build up some strong and meaningful partnerships? That's a bit the question.
Yeah, thank you. I really would like to debate with what everyone is saying. Marianne, Philip, very interesting presentations, but first, I will invite you to read the report we are going to release with Praxis Institute of Participatory Practices in March, and that we are doing with all our Global South partners, because we are going to, we are listening to hundreds of donors and civil society organizations, so we can present very clear recommendations on how we can shift the power. So we have a philanthropy, we have a donor strategy that is Southern-led and really not colonial or neo-colonial as we see now. So that will be released in March. But for now, I'd say that it's basically everything that Marianne was saying and that the communities foundations are saying. Donors have to start funding local, no more intermediaries. They need to do the hard work of connecting with the communities, with the local and national civil society organizations. They need to start learning how to fund social movement, the networks that, like all of us, are so ready, and we've been working for decades with none or little funding. And that means really taking risk, building trust, doing your work of developing relationship with organizations like ours, and even partnering even if you don't know us. So you can give us the opportunity to create trust, even if we cannot simulate exactly what you believe have to be done in order for us to manage funds. We are the ones who know how to do change on the ground, and we need the funds to be managed 100% by us. So for that, and I second what Philip was saying, we need leaders like Philip, and we need INGOs that really can partner with local organizations, and can, you know, be leaders on this power shift. So white people, Northern people, technocrats, consultants, volunteers really understand that privileges are no more, and that they need to devolve and share power, and that means perhaps losing your job. So yes, sometimes you will need to change system, procedures, policies that are really discriminatory of the global South and local organizations. You will need to change your values and belief, and you will need to be doing very uncomfortable decisions for many, and do the good fight in the global North. So you really share resources and share decisions with all of us. In terms of South-South cooperation, there is something that is called triangular cooperation, which is Northern donors supporting South-South programs. And that is being tested, is being done at the UN level. There are many case studies that are being done on how Northern actors support South-South cooperation, but it's still a very small attempt, very limited. And of course, the triangular, when it becomes triangular, then you still see the challenge of imposition of a lot of standards, conditionalities, way of doing M&E, etc. So I think that we need to look at triangular cooperation. We need to create perhaps a global index to monitor how donors are really sharing power, and how they are ensuring that decisions are with us, including what is South-South and triangular cooperation. So it doesn't it's not another, you know, opportunity to pretend that you are localizing, but you are not really doing that, because decisions are still with the donor. So it really requires a lot of bold decisions, and I think we are making progress. But from the Global South, we need to start monitoring donors and hopefully creating a ranking and an index of practices that some of them are doing or not doing very soon. Maybe this is something that we will come back in next year after we conclude our project. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Might I ask you, you just mentioned the report that will be released in March 2023. If you could maybe put in the chat the link of the website where it will be probably published or something, so that the participants can have that link at hand. That might be useful for some of them.
Yes, it's Global Change Center.
Good. Meanwhile, we would like to take questions also from you as the audience. So if you have some questions in mind, please prepare them. I'll just go to a general question first, and then we'll start having a look at the questions that we have from the audience. So the general question is, the three of you come from different civil society backgrounds, right? What do you think are the critical factors that civil society actors will need to lead a transformational approach to partnership and truly shift power in the future global configuration? What are these needs for those critical factors for the civil society actors? I don't know if one of you would like to answer.
I could. Oh.
No, Mariana, you go.
You like...
No, please. No, after you.
Okay. I think, Gary, it would be like a summary of what we have been discussing here today. So Cecilia mentioned the demand-driven approach, and instead of an approach of a top-down approach, and I think this is really a critical factor when we're talking about transformation and change and building partnerships, and also opennesses and flexibility to learn. So being flexible and very open for taking risks and for learning, the respect for diversity, and finally, the solidarity. I think it's really important too when we're building solid partnerships among civil society organizations locally and internationally. I just open now for you, Philip.
Just to add to, I think, to that list, which I would agree with all of, I think that civil society organizations have to be prepared to hold themselves, to be held accountable, to what I would call primary actors, to the communities that they work with and they serve. And I think one of the things that we can demonstrate is, and challenge donors around, is if we're prepared to be accountable in our delivery. And this goes back to some of the stuff that Cecilia said at the start around why NGOs or INGOs in some spaces have fallen into disrepute. It's because actually, and particularly with Northern NGOs, there is a risk, a very real risk, that we have no legitimacy. And, you know, Cecilia and Mariana will know this better than me, you know, working with community-based organizations, but what is our legitimacy based on? And it can only be based on, if you're a Northern NGO, on your accountability, unless you're just assuming that it's based on your reputation to Northern NGOs, to Northern governments and their agendas. And for me, you know, if we're going to operate ethically and morally, we have to hold ourselves to account, or be held to account, not just by donors, but by the people that we serve and are legitimated by. So that's what I would add. Accountability is an important element.
Should I say something quickly? Just to connect with the accountability aspect. There is also a buzzword fashion movement now around, you know, building the right feedback mechanisms, the ensuring that there is grounded listening processes in all the programming that we do. But at the end of the day, the responsibility to building these mechanisms for feedback, for complaining, for improvement of programs are created by the donors or the INGOs. They are not in the hands of what Philip called primary actors. They are not in the hands of the civil society organizations and the citizens themselves. The mechanisms are created at the end of the day by external actors. So I would say it's potentially a challenge we can all think about, which is a little bit what I was saying before. Let's create our own civil society mechanisms to rank, make accountable, control, and monitor the donors that are and INGOs that are operating in the global South country. I'm not saying governments controlling these organizations. You know, the Indian government, the Bolivian governments, they are putting a lot of problems into INGOs, NGOs operating, and we need them to continue operating. But we, the citizens in the Global South, need to be the one controlling them, not our governments on our behalf, not the INGOs on their own behalf. It has to be ourselves. So I wonder if it is a good idea, and I'm just speaking out loud, just to create a participatory ranking and index to hold INGOs and donors accountable by a network and a South-South solidarity network of civil society organizations.
Sorry, thank you, Cecilia. Good, we would like now to open up the space for questions from the audience. So if somebody would be interested in asking a question to all the panel members or maybe one of them, please raise your hands. And then we can have a look at who we would like to get an answer from. I see Paul Okumu that you've raised your hand. So if you'd like to go, just yeah, open up your mic, and if you're willing, open up your video, and then you can ask a question.
Okay, sorry. I have managed to open up my mic, but I can't open up my video. But your
that is mic
okay.
Is fine.
Thank you all very much. Yes, and honestly, I very sincerely appreciate the discussion going on. And for those of us who have been in the development sector dealing with these power relations for about 20 or so years, it's very refreshing to hear what is coming. I will just share what I think I've already posted, and that is every time these kinds of discussions come up, I see two things. One is we tend to be defensive, and we want to show that individually there are some of us who are different from the rest and how we are doing things well, which is fine. But then the other thing that I think then ignores some of what I think and what I believe are the fundamental issues. And I have posted them there. And I'm wondering whether this is a forum where we can try to really address those kinds drivers. Do you think that what we are dealing with in terms of power relations are matters of ideology and survival rather than matters of balancing politics? Because I think we tend to treat it as if we are just balancing politics and balancing power. But what I see on the African continent in the relationship between the North and the South is that there's a very strong dependency that the North has on the African continent. And that dependency drives almost everything they do. It drives their ideology, it drives how they act. And I'm wondering, how do we change that dependency and that ideological drive instead of focusing on just shifting their manifestations? I'm done.
Thank you, Paul. I don't know if one of the panel members would like to answer. Cecilia, I see you activating your microphone.
I mean, I think it's very much related with a little bit of a historical background I shared at the beginning. At the end of the day, when we are talking of new ways of doing international cooperation, it's not new ways, it's the struggle for decolonization that started decades and centuries ago. And I just named the Bandung Conference just as an example, but we all have examples of how we have fought for decades against the colonial ideology. And yes, it's an ideology that is sustained in all these ideas of northern white superiority, male superiority, and it's been there for ages and is deployed through now also donors, NGOs, social media, mass communication channels, etc. So it's definitely an ideology that we need to deconstruct. We need to continue challenge. And now in doing everything that we are trying to say here, that is, we are saying, and definitely is related with extractivism, colonialism, where about centuries of our countries being absolutely destroyed by the northern countries, so they were able to develop and industrialized. And this is all the climate change conversation at the moment. And for example, now we just got the good news in the last COP27 that there will be a damage fund, recognizing that the Global South doesn't need aid, needs reparations and need payments, because all the damage from the extractivism which continues now also through the partnership with the private sector in many ways that are not respecting human rights and that are in alignment with our national governments, depleting the little that is left because of these extractivist policies. So definitely relates with the extractivism and the colonial ideology that we've been trying to dismantle for decades, but we need to continue.
Okay, thank you, Cecilia. I don't know if one of the other panel members would like to add something. If not, we go to the next question. Philip?
I suppose, I mean, so there's certainly an ideological dominance, and as Cecilia said, it's deeply rooted in, you know, sort of colonial history and white privilege. So that's a big thing to fight against, and you can see it, if I can be blunt, within NGOs as well. Just this sense of, you know, anyway, I don't, you know, but it's true. It's very deep seated, and getting people to recognise their own privilege within the system. You know, I can see it as a chief executive. You know, if I interact, there's certain recognize as privilege and power, and you know, you've got to be honest about it. But I think that this, I mean, one of the challenges, you know, in Africa, I suppose, is, you know, Paul is right that, I mean, if you look at what China is doing now in terms of that agenda, I think what frightens Europe and the West, so to speak, is actually the power of China, for example, in you know, really sort of outgunning the sort of the North in its historical colonial agenda. And so there is a real risk that actually, you know, geopolitics continues to play out in Africa. And in some ways, you know, this is where, again, if we're going to be honest, civil society needs to be much more respectful, certain northern NGOs, in supporting African civil society in this case to make its case. So, for example, you know, on VSO, we work with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. And so there's no need for VSO to have that voice. if the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance is speaking out on those issues. What we should be doing, it seems to me, is supporting PACJA and organizations like it to exercise its voice and ceding our place at tables of power to make sure they can articulate their case and make an African case. So I suppose, that's what INGOs can do, I think, in terms of thinking about how they interact in these spaces. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Philip. We'll move on to the next question. Christian Kotza, you raised your hand. If you can open your mic, if your camera works fine, if not, just the mic is okay.
Thank you very much. I would first of all want to thank you for organizing this. To be part of this dynamic conversation is something which is great for the Global South. I'm actually in Malawi. So I'm actually representing the Leave No One coalition for Malawi. And what captures my interest a lot is where we are talking about partnerships. I will get straight to what Cecilia just shared in terms of the will to see if we can be able to confront some of the ideologies, not in a negative kind of fashion, but in a way that we can actually engage or provide a platform for engagement between the national organizations, the donor community, and other players in this space, including the INGOs, just like where I am working, to make sure that we are indeed opening up spaces for more participation in terms of implementation by the national or local implementers. But now there is quite some fears in terms of taking the risk by the prime implementers. This is referring to the INGOs and probably the donors themselves. But what we are saying is that there are models that maybe we can try to learn together as we work. We may not just get straight to a financial kind of agreements in terms of implementation. We may start small, looking at where we can work together even without actually getting the funds in such kind of agreements. And then we'll actually go along. But now the other way to do that is now what Cecilia was proposing. So we can actually have global coalitions, be it South, or maybe North-South, but now looking at organizations or movements that are like-minded to see how best we can keep the balance in a way that we can do it better. My final point is on the willingness. What is it that is driving organizations to actually make sure that, okay, if we are an INGO like CARE, what will drive us? What will be the motivation of us to implement directly, maybe 40% and do 60% indirectly through other partners? Is it that we are just looking at the shrinking space in terms of the direction, looking at what the donors are actually pushing for? Or is it that we understand the fact that implementing through these partners, since they are locally positioned, we are actually to get more impact and even at scale? So those are the kind of dynamics that I just wanted to share in the space to see how it's working in other areas. Thank you very much.
Good. I don't know which panel member would like maybe to reply on Chris' reflection.
I think he said it.
Yes, he had the answer.
Okay, so we'll move maybe then to a last raised hand. I see Azmat Khan raise his hand.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's really nice to listen to all of you and like very thought-provoking thoughts. So just to add to the discussion which already has taken place, like the very definition of localization and shifting the power, like the local actors do see a flaw in them right from the beginning, and that is the current definition of localization and shifting the power is counting only if the funding is going to the local actors, they consider it localization, and if the projects are being implemented by the local actors, they consider it as the power being shifted. But in fact, like the major decisions, which sector gets how much funding, which solution, like what are the problems which needs to be prioritized, and how much funding should go to which sector is still taken by the capitals in the global north. So this is for the time being, like for me, I'm working with FRD in Pakistan, and I don't consider it as a tussle between the international NGOs and the local NGOs. We all are civil society organizations, and we all need to raise voice for changing this dynamic. The global north has to accept the indigenous wisdom and the local knowledge of the global south. The global north should stop acting like they know everything and they have the solution for everything. And if they are giving dollars or euros or whatever currency they have, so their solution must be implemented. Power will be shifted only when we give the global south this opportunity to prioritize their own problems, their own sectors, and their way outs. And we are not saying that this would happen in isolation. So the global north and the global south needs to sit with each other. And for the time being, we in global south, we are sort of considered as recipients, so we do not have the power to negotiate on the table. And at the end of the day, it is the global north who imposes their solutions on us. So the way out should be like more acceptance of each other's and giving more space to each other. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's not really a question there either.
I have a quick comment just to react, because the Azmat inspired me. I struggle a lot with the term localization because it's basically northern led. So the agencies in the north, they are localizing. So that is not really a term that we would like to use when we talk with the framework of decolonization and South-South cooperation. So I would go for equitable globalization, perhaps. And promoting multipolarity, promoting a multipolar world in which the power of everyone, every country, every community, indigenous, including, of course, it's recognized, integrated, included value, and really at the center of everything we do. So I propose to start not to talk of localization, but perhaps equitable globalization, or just South-South cooperation.
Okay, thank you, Cecilia. Good. So we're now approaching the end of the session. I think it gave us a lot of food for thought for many of us, and then of course we're aware there's still a lot of work to do. Maybe to wrap it up in some way, I would like to say it's not so much about the North now leading on how the South-South cooperation needs to look like, but it's about the North taking this back seat that Philip mentioned, right? The North leaving the space, opening a real opportunity and giving the right conditions so that the Southern actors and Southern communities can take this space, can fill it in, and can really take the responsibility and try to give solutions or provide solutions in the way they feel they need to be provided for. And then, of course, is a big ask from a lot of Northern actors, INGOs, Northern donors, right? They need to be aware of the privileges they have and the privileges with which they work and operate nowadays. And B, they really need to open up to different ways of working. I think that's a big condition here. If they are not opening their way of operating or their operational models and adjusting them to really taking that back seat and leaving the decision making and the opportunities to others, then it will be a very complex thing to achieve and it will take much more time. So that are maybe just my final remarks. And now over to you, Miriam.
Thank you, Gerrit. Thank you for moderating, and also thanks to our speakers for your thoughtful contributions and for taking us through this journey from the conception and history of South-South cooperation to the brave changes that have been undertaken by some forward-looking organizations like VSO. And I hope we can use these learnings to inform and improve future partnerships and move away from the unequal power dynamics that we discussed today. And I also hope that that can be useful for us to think about how we can put local communities at the forefront, and also I hope that the call to action of changing our beliefs to take uncomfortable decisions and also being ruthless in a way we approach change is also being taken by the participants of this panel. And finally, as we continue challenging the way in which the civil society work, we always keep in mind that it's important also to challenge the fallacy that still exists that knowledge and capacity has to come from the global north, as a rich tradition of global South practitioners and activists has taught us. So thanks again to our brilliant speakers. I also would like to thank our international science interpreters and captioners for the work, as well as our Spanish translators, and also the center team. And finally, I also want to thank you all for participating and for your active engagement and questions.